It was really very interesting and a very innovative time for many teachers because they achieved more in 4 months than they'll have been able to achieve in the last 4 years. There are some elements of teaching that are very, very difficult in this kind of environment, like teaching half a class face-to-face while the other half are online is almost impossible and quite exhausting. So it's a little like asking a surgeon to operate at the same time as he's also trying to clean his shoes or her shoes.
Like many of you this year, I've been madly swinging between managing my work team via video conference from my lounge room to the kitchen, where I'm helping my daughter with Year 7 algebra. And let me tell you, I didn't do so well with that the first time around. And we've all seen our colleagues' kids fighting in the background during the middle of yet another Zoom meeting. Helping kids with remote learning has been one of the more unexpected aspects of this year. So what's that been like then for the thousands of teachers trying to wrangle it all from the other side? I'm Kelly Reardon, and this is Curveball, the podcast where the country's top leaders tell us how they deal with things flying at them from every direction. Today, School Principal Dr. Briony Scott tells us how they did it, on the run, with brand new technology and zero time to prepare. Plus, what it was like to deal with another curveball she couldn't have predicted.
We were gobsmacked at that point. But my first thought was I just had to get to them because if I knew my kids were okay, then we would then work out the rest. And then my husband and I, Mark and I, well, I've got 3 daughters and we've obviously talked with them, and my mum and dad were just brilliant. And we just regrouped. But at that point, it was all pretty grim.
Dr. Briony Scott is one of those exceptional principals who steered parents and students through the lockdown period. She leads Sydney private school Wenona College, which is home to more than 1,200 students. Dr. Scott, when did you first start planning for COVID-19 and its impact?
For me personally, I'd been watching what was happening around the world at the end of the previous year. So back in 2019, we were watching what was happening, particularly in Spain. I guess our eldest daughter was over in Barcelona doing her MBA, and we were listening and watching to reports of what was happening in Europe, in certain areas of Europe. So by the time school came back or the staff came back mid-January, I was already on guard. I was already watching quite acutely as to what was going to happen and what their ramifications were. And then by the time our first international student landed, the night while she was in the air, the first one who came back, the announcement came that these students from China in particular had to go into quarantine. So we were already ready and primed, but it became public, I guess, around about that time.
And what was your disaster planning like? Because are you well rehearsed for these types of scenarios?
We're well rehearsed for critical incidents. So, and in my career, I've had a number of them, sadly. And so we have a very strong framework around what to do when things go wrong. This is a little different for us all, and all schools have this, so this is not unique to our school. In fact, there is great uniformity, I guess, in how you manage big communities when things go wrong. The difference is that when something normally goes wrong, it's normally the death of a child or something along those lines, that we're all very united about how we react, how we feel, and what we do. The challenge here is that you had incredibly disparate views. So you had some people who were there going, this is just a cold, don't be so ridiculous, and other people going, we're all going to die. And so somewhere along that spectrum, if you've got a community, and the community is bigger than the kids, so we have over 1,200 kids, that's 2,400 parents, throw in your step-parents, throw in your grandparents, and throw in your teaching staff. We comfortably look after a community of about 5,000 who are actively involved in everything that we're doing here. And so you have everyone spread out along that spectrum. And so managing how people responded largely together that honoured the different views and the different reactions and the different risk appetites of people meant that this was really quite an unusual incident to lead through.
And you did decide to close earlier. Why did you do that? Just talk me through that decision-making process.
We didn't do it hugely early. We took a week off term one. And there are a number of reasons for that. Partly because we did want to manage now, let me think. There are two elements of it. So partly we did recognise that the tensions and the expectations were building, that it was an inevitable thing. We had already started moving people over. So we would get different year groups out for different days. Then we'd have 2-year groups out. Then we'd have 3-year groups out. We started putting teams of staff on campus and off campus because we were just trying to test our system and to see what was going to happen, whether we could support a full school closure. And so I capped that out about a week before the end of term, which is, in an ideal world, I would have done it at the end of term, but we were ready to go into full lockdown knowing everything would largely work by that second last week of term. And so in the end, it was like, great, we're done. The other element of it is that people's anxiety, societal anxiety at that point was really at an all-time high. There was a lot of unrest, a lot of unhappiness, a lot of parents and families in schools across the country were already pulling their kids out for a variety of reasons, often because they had families themselves that were immunosuppressed or were at high risk. They didn't want their children bringing infection home. So by that point, we were getting into this kind of quite dysfunctional mode again, where you had some kids in class and some kids operating at home. And because we were on a process where we were trialling things and building up our capacity, at that point it seemed easier to go, right, we're just going to work from home in this last week and hopefully you'll be back next term and everything will be great. But as it was, it didn't quite work that way.
It's quite a delicate balance between government requirements, what Education New South Wales was saying, what parents want. You copped maybe a little bit of heat for being too early?
Not for closing the school. No, that we were fine with that one. I had no issue with that. Where we copped heat was when I said that our students needed to bring masks to school and they needed to wear them in certain situations. And there were people who felt, including significant parts of the media, who felt that that was just ridiculous and, how dramatic. And then there were other people who were there going, great, at least someone's made the decision. There were doctors who thought, you don't know what you're talking about, that's the silliest thing you can do with children. And then you had doctors going, best leadership decision we've seen in the education sector, well done. So there was this really interesting tension, but when people were coming at us with either adoration or criticism, it was reflecting where they were coming from. And none of them were leading a community of 5,000 people. So, and they know nothing about schools. And so we're looking at it going, it's all very well, for example, for year 12 who go, we want to come back. And I go, well, there's no point getting you back if your teachers, who are the older, more experienced teachers, for example, can't be here because they have concerns about their own health. So allowing the teachers to come in and say, actually, if I'm going to teach you, I want you guys to be wearing masks. And that was the language we used around it, that sense of it's not about you, it's about your impact on others and how you help make them feel. And honestly, our kids were magnificent. They just, once I explained the reasoning behind what I was doing, they got it and the criticism died away. And then about 3 or 4 weeks after that, the public debate went on to whether there should be masks or not and continues to this day. So I think it was a good decision, but we definitely copped flack for it.
It's hard to go against conventional wisdom. So I'm interested in how you hold firm on something you believe to be right in the face of pressure to back down. Like what do you what's happening in your mind?
How do you do that? Well, yeah, it is a challenge. I was looking beyond Australia. So I'd been listening and reading and watching what the Centres for Disease Control was saying out of America, what the European, I can't remember the title of it, but there's a big European organisation that look after public health, and reading what they were saying. I was looking at the mandates that they were issuing and expecting to issue. And I was looking at what was happening globally, not just what was happening in Sydney and through Australian politics. And it's not my job to buy into politics or to make decisions based for political reasons. So politicians have to factor in what everybody thinks and feels, and they have to kind of get the most out of their community in terms of people kind of doing what they're meant to do. I didn't have to do that. I had to look after and keep my kids safe, and I had to look after and keep my teachers safe.
How was the shutdown and the move to remote learning then communicated with the school body?
Well, I, at that point, was probably over-communicating. We had one of the challenges within education is that we were seeking or getting advice from the Prime Minister, the Federal Minister for Health, the Chief Medical Officer at the federal level, the Premier, the State Medical Officer, the State Education Department. At one point, we had 10 different people who were issuing instructions as to what schools should be doing, and often giving their press conferences at the same time, and often giving, conflicting advice. So originally we would notify parents fairly quickly because they were nervous about what was happening and they just needed to understand what our expectations were and what we were going to be doing about it. We really had what was effectively an acute critical incident to begin with onto a chronic critical incident. And now we're actually beyond that point and into, okay, now we're constructing a new normal.
And how prepared were you for the technology required, the Microsoft Teams or the Zoom or the Skype?
Yeah. Well, like all things, in this particular one, we'd been working on the technology the year before anyway. We were certainly not about to escalate it to the extent that it was escalated. We basically, I got up to the staff and I said, how we've been talking about this now we're doing it, and we're doing it straight away. We're doing it immediately. So if you have any reservations at this point, you need to park them. You don't have a choice. We're all moving into this mode of delivery. And it's interesting. I'm not sure. We learned so much. We learned about how children deal with screen time. We learned around, meetings and how you present stuff online in ways that you just can't do in the classroom and vice versa. So we moved incredibly quickly, and we had money that we saved from other areas because we weren't running excursions and things, all went into how can we support our staff so that they can upskill really quickly on this. So we learned an enormous amount, but we did have to learn. And so we tweaked and moderated as we went through. A normal timetable, you go from period 1 or session 1 to session 2, and there's kind of this break that happens in between. You see your friends in the corridor, you smile, you wave, you go to the bathroom, you get a drink, and off you go. When you do Zoom meetings, of course, there was never that. So we had to learn how to go, okay, you now need to get up, go away and come back in 10 minutes and then we'll talk, and we'll connect again. So there was a lot that we learned, and the only way you could learn it was by doing it.
It's interesting that you have boarders at the school and how you made the decisions about closing the boarding house, because I imagine that many of those students would have had nowhere to go. Their parents are overseas or in rural parts of the country.
And that's spot on. And so when they first closed, it was predominantly because of instructions that we'd got that had the infection hit the boarding house, it would be a little like the Ruby Princess in that everyone would be locked down indefinitely. Yeah. And we just went, look, that's actually intolerable. It's intolerable for kids to do that. So we found homes for them. We had beautiful families who said, look, we'll take them. We had a lot of the rural kids went home. They don't have, some of them don't have the same internet access. We made sure that we were able to support them wherever they were. But we had one little kid at the beginning of the year who at the ripe old age of 14 landed in Australia without her parents, having never seen the school, and basically was told, as we said to her, we're going to have to put you up with a family because you can't come to school. You have to go through this 2 weeks quarantine. Legend that she did it, but I thought 14, that's an extraordinary, and she still hasn't seen her parents all year because she can't get back to China. Or she can get back, but she can't then come back into Australia to finish her education.
That resilience of students is interesting to me. How have they coped with this COVID curveball? Have they been a bit sad for themselves? Year 12s are missing out on their formal. They don't know what, the final exams are going to be like.
Yes. There's been a lot around how Year 12 have been affected. And I remember talking to my 84-year-old mother, and she was like, well, I remember when polio came through and the cinemas were closed for 3 years and no one was allowed to go in public swimming pools. And it enabled me to recalibrate just a little bit and go, okay, this actually has happened before and they are just fine. So I had a conversation, particularly with year 12, and said, sulk for 24 hours, but then you come back and you tell me, I don't want to just do Band-Aids and do, well, we could have done this, so we're going to have to modify it. I go, come up with a whole new way of doing it and doing this year group. And I also want you to get the best HSC results you've ever had. Like I want you to put your head down, butt up, and just get on with the job. And I think they were, once again, they were great. Young people invariably are. They look to adults for the cues as to how to behave. And so the more commentary there is like around, oh, you poor thing, isn't this awful, you don't get a formal. I'm like, give me a break. A formal is not a rite of passage. A formal is an event. It is nothing. And if you are telling me that the only thing that is going to make this moment special for you is that you get to wear a party dress, then I've raised you all wrong. Like that is never it. A rite of passage is turning from a child into a woman. It's turning from a girl into an adult who has the capacity to take responsibility for herself. So I probably didn't leave a lot of space for the whole woe is us thing. Having said that, and if we withdraw from year 12 and we look at young people generally, what they have come back with is a very strong sense of how much relationships matter, how much they got to spend time with their parents, time with their siblings. They wanted to be back at school. They're over technology. And every now and then in a generation, things happen that mark that generation and that can change the direction of how the world is unfolding. And when we did a lot of work with these young women and followed up with a lot of them around what they've learned, overwhelmingly it was around the benefit of relationships and not taking school for granted and understanding that they are loved and supported. And even if you don't like your tribe, which you often don't at this age, that sense of I'm connected here, and that when the chips were down, whether I like it or not, this is my tribe. I find that really interesting, how they came back with a deeper sense of appreciation for the people in their world.
I'm Kelly Reardon, and this is Curveball, a show where we're honest about the stuff that we just didn't see coming. Dr. Briony Scott is the principal of Sydney's Wenona College, and like hundreds of teachers, she's been right at the forefront of this whole pivot to remote learning we've all been going through. I'm wondering, Briony, for you personally, what's this been like? I mean, at the height of all of this, were you panicked or were you sort of steely focused?
Well, the challenge about running a school community is that it's all people, 150% people. And so you don't get to be steely focused in the sense that everything I say or everything I do, those words have power and they have the ability to imbue people with hope or for them to feel disillusioned or disheartened. So when you're in leadership in a school community or in a big community where it's all around people, there are no car parts, there are no widgets, it's all around people and how they're travelling, and you will never get any one person who's the same as anyone else. So you're constantly looking and checking and, touching base to make sure that people are okay. Now, it's not my job to make people happy. It's not what I do. But it is my job to help navigate people through life so that they can make decisions and they can act from a position of strength and not weakness. And then you're dealing with the fact that you actually then have sustained stress over months. So people, by and large, can regulate their emotions for a period of time, but over time, as that goes on, their ability to regulate their emotions gets poorer. So there is an element about going, I need to be conscious of my emotions, my feelings, and that I don't go down that path either, but that I can sustain that over time. But you can't be steely about it because everyone is so different. It's just a really complex form of leadership.
This reflection, though, on the things that truly matter, which I think something that we've all taken stock of this year. It's not the first time for you, though, that you've had a moment in your life where you've been able to reflect on what makes a good life. You had another curveball thrown at you a few years ago. You're healthy, you're young, you don't smoke, and then suddenly a diagnosis.
I did, yes. So was diagnosed with lung cancer 5 years ago, actually, this month. So, which is extraordinary, and it's not a great cancer to get if you go on Google. And so at that time when we did do it, the single-digit chance of survival, it's gone up now, but not much because there's such an extraordinary stigma around this form of cancer, and so much so that just basically no one is prepared to fund it, and no one lives long enough basically to do any advocacy work. So it's one of those, and yet it kills more Australians than any other cancer or the next 2 or 3 cancers combined, but we just never talk about it. So it was a really interesting moment from a leadership perspective.
How did you deal with telling the students and your school community about it?
It really mattered to me. So in my community, I love these young people. I just love what I do. I love who they are. I am not a fool. I'm a tough love principal, and I get that, but the love for them is real. And so in terms of, and I knew that when I said something to anyone that they would Google it and they would know that I was going to die, which is what we thought at the time too. And so I had to get to the parents, and I wrote to the parents and I just said, basically, I need your help here. This is what has happened. I need you to pull your kid in, and I need you to look them in the eye, and I need you to tell them that everything is okay. No matter what happens, everything is going to be okay. And the story or the analogy I used is I said, you can't stop. If you look at the night sky, you can't stop the things that happen to you. The things that happen to you are like the stars in the sky. They're just there. You wish it wasn't so, but there it is. But the constellations, they're the stories you tell around the stars. They're the stories or the images or the narrative. You can tell them a strong believer in narratives. That influences the telling of the story. And so I need you, I can't stop the stars, you need to tell them about this, but I want you to tell them a story of hope, and I want you to tell them a story that everything is going to be okay, and that I didn't say this in the letter, but that even if I died, that everything was okay. And you know what, as a community, they did that. They were just great, because most parents, they want their kids, they do the right thing by their kids as best they can, and that helped me enormously deal with the grief of what we were going through.
Briony, could you tell yourself a story at that time that you were going to be okay?
No, not at all. I was we were gobsmacked at that point. But my first thought was I just had to get to them, because if I knew my kids were okay, then we would then work out the rest. And then my husband and I, Mark and I, we obviously, I've got 3 daughters, and we obviously talked with them, and my mum and dad were just brilliant. And we just regrouped. But at that point, it was all pretty grim.
What did you reflect on most at that time? Like, what do you hold on to coming out the other side of that?
What did I hold on to? I learned an enormous amount around, we are deeply private as a family, and so we weren't the sort of people who had blogs up and running and, kind of daily updates for our friends. And particularly at first, we didn't think that there was a lot of hope, and so it took a little while to go, well, hold it, you're not dead yet. And it took a little while to go, actually, most people who have lung cancer are not in as fortunate a position as I am. And much as we criticise Australia, we do have a phenomenal healthcare system. We have amazing scientists and doctors who do an extraordinary job on the smell of an oily rag to deliver for their patients. And I remember meeting my oncologist the first time and just going, because by that point it had gone everywhere. So we, as a family, the letter went out to the community. the five of us went to see some really, really poor quality movie, came out, and the news had spread around the world. So, my brother in America had heard, my friends in Germany had heard. It was just one of those things that kind of went viral as a product of, who we are and what we do here in Australia. And the enormity of that was kind of a bit overwhelming. So when I met the oncologist, I'm like, no pressure, but the whole world's kind of watching, but he and the surgeon and the radiology, it was a full-on treatment process, but they were just legends in terms of, it's not over till the fat lady sings, and it wasn't over then. And so I went into that determined to not be the reason why I wouldn't make it. And I relied very heavily on something called the Stockdale paradox, which is written about in Jim Collins' book Good to Great, that talks about never losing sight of the grim reality of the situation that you're in, at the same time as you never lose that relentless hope that you're going to succeed in the end. And they're two they appear mutually exclusive, but they're actually not. You can hold both at exactly the same time. And I think that's exactly what I did. We went in assuming and understanding the grim reality of what we were facing, but we also went, yep, and we'll get through it.
This is Curveball, the podcast where we give you a ringside seat into the leadership qualities of some of Australia's brightest and boldest leaders. My guest today is Dr. Briony Scott, the principal of Wenona College. Let's say the N-word, NAPLAN.
Oh, yes.
It was cancelled this year. Yes. You're not a fan of this style of testing though, are you?
No, I'm not a fan of how it is used. So I'm a great believer in diagnostic testing. I do not believe at all that you then use all those tests to make a judgment about how the school's going. So an example, or a comparable example that might be easier to understand, is if you go to the cardiology ward of a hospital and you do a whole lot of diagnostic tests around the patients in a particular ward, and you go, oh man, look at this, these results are so bad, that must be an awful hospital. And you just stop and you go, well, no, actually, they have a certain type of person that's in that ward. There are a whole lot of reasons why their conditions are not good. In fact, some of the worst NAPLAN results might actually be happening in schools that are doing phenomenal work with the clientele they're doing. So you can't lump individual diagnostic tests together and then say, and now we're going to rank you. We're going to compare you with other schools. We're going to do all of this sort of stuff. There are other measures you can use. There are other things you can do with the diagnostic test, but you just can't pull them together and compare schools like that.
What are your thoughts about it going online?
Look, I love technology. I love it going online. I just like it to work if it's going to happen.
I mean, it must be hard, though, especially for primary kids who, does it just test who's quick with the mouse and who has access to computers at home?
Look, NAPLAN is a very crude instrument. It is a little, I keep using medical analogies because they're similar in the sense that, you're both professionals and you kind of know your domain. NAPLAN testing is like using a butter knife for surgery. You can do it, but they're crude instruments at best. There are a lot of other ways that you can do it. For some schools, NAPLAN may just be the perfect device for them to assist them in getting a sense of where children are at. Personally, I don't think that NAPLAN testing across the board in any form is actually helpful the way the information is used.
Your husband, Mark Scott, that you mentioned previously, is the boss of Education New South Wales. He's publicly in favour of NAPLAN. So how are things around the dinner table on this topic?
Yeah, I think we agree to disagree on this one. And at the end of the day, my role is different. I'm at the coalface. I'm in schools. I know what I'm talking about. and he's he heads up the education. I would not say that. I mean, I think it's funny, because we are in different sectors of the education system as well, and 95% of what we talk about, we are in complete sync. But he runs a system. I run a school, and so he has to make decisions for hundreds of thousands of people and I make them for 5,000. So it's a little similar to a parent coming to the school going, well, I want you to make this decision for my child. And I go, it's not just about your child, it's about a community of 1,200 kids or 5,000 people. And ditto for Mark, he has to make decisions that relate to an extraordinarily, I think, one of the largest school systems in the world. It might be beaten by New York or it's just under New York, but it's one of the largest systems in the world. He has to make decisions that I don't even have to look at, So we will disagree because we come at it at different sizes, if you like.
Apart from working for Education New South Wales, he, of course, was previously the managing director of the ABC, and you're leading this big, prestigious school, and I know that you're both very present to those 3 daughters that you have. So I'm interested in how you balance that and negotiate, who's taking the kids to soccer at 6 p.m. when someone's got a meeting and...
Yes, so the girls have all left home now, so they're all older and they're all in their mid-20s and have got lives and careers of their own. They do come home a lot on the weekend, and it's interesting looking at this age group where they're independent, but they do come home to recalibrate, to refuel, and then go off again, which I find really interesting and gives us both enormous joy. When they were little, which of course, we're obviously very involved in our respective works, look, there was a lot of healthy negotiation, I think. We did some things successfully and some things not. But I don't think our girls always knew that we would drop everything for them, and they always knew that we had their back, and they always knew that they were dearly, dearly loved. And there wasn't Uber Eats at the time, but there was a lot of takeaway on Friday nights where we would do pizza and red wine, and not for them, for us. And we would just kind of recalibrate after a busy week. And many young people have busy weeks too, right? So it was just a way for us to get together and go, okay, just stop, breathe, recalibrate. But we didn't always do it well. The house went to rack and ruin. They all left home and we looked up at the ceiling and found the holes up there and we're like, oh, this is why we maintain, our houses. We really kind of spent a lot of time with them and with our work. Neither of us are hugely social people. Like, we're not out at parties or on the social scene. It's kind of not what we do. So it is our family that matter everything to us, and then we really, both of us, enjoy our work.
You spent quite a lot of time at home raising the girls, and I'm wondering when it was which I think you completely look fondly back on and don't regret at all, but when it's your turn to be at home and you're in the career back seat,
yes,
I'm just wondering where you parked some of that energy and that ambition.
Well, we had 3 children, 5 and under, so there wasn't a lot of energy left at the end of the day. We had tagged throughout our respective careers, so there were times where absolutely Mark was the priority, and he went and did some study in America for a while, and I took 2 of the 3 kids, the third one wasn't born, we didn't leave her behind, over there, and that was his time. And then when we came back, he was like, well, what do you want to do? And it's always been a very equal relationship. I did stay home for 11 years, and in retrospect, I don't regret it. At the time, there were times when I went, oh, you've got to be kidding me, and I'd apply for a job, and then I'd think, actually, I don't want to do this. I just don't want to lose this window now. But that was my call. I challenged some narratives in the sense that often women are told, if you don't get back into the workforce, then you won't, you'll have missed out, you'll have fallen behind. And while your confidence does go, in fact, when you do go back into the work, you often go back with a lot more focus. I know what was important to me. I knew what was important to me. But I look back now and I think there's so much pressure on women to kind of choose the right thing. And I'm like, if you want to go back to work after 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years, just do what is right for you and for your family. The thing I had going in my favour was that Mark is just a legendary guy, and he there was never any doubt in his mind that wherever I went, they were lucky to get me. Now, I'm not sure that everyone, wherever I went, thought that, but he did, and that made it a lot easier because he was prepared to do things that I think not every partner would be prepared to do.
How do you instill that leadership quality in the girls that you're then educating and encourage them that their career is going to ebb and flow and they're going to have time where they lean in or lean out, and that all of those things, on balance are great for life.
They are.
Because there is a lot of pressure now to like move up in your career and get ahead, and you think you can't. I certainly thought I couldn't stay out of the workforce for too long. I mean, I had some time off, but it felt like the pressure when technology is moving and workplaces are moving so quickly that if you were out for a decade, it's hard to
too long.
claw that back.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing is to kind of work out where that narrative is coming from. With the young women that I'm raising up all the time. I mean, there are a generation, particularly at this school, where we are raising strong feminist women who absolutely, I don't actually care what they do, so we're not raising lawyers or doctors or, I actually don't care at all what you do, but make sure it's your choice and not the choice of society or the choice of expectations of other people. So how do you tap into what works for you is such a core and fundamental part of moving forward.
Briony Scott, let's talk about technology in the classroom, because obviously this last few months has shown us what's possible. But how engaged were you already with utilising technology in classrooms?
It's definitely changing, and we're learning a lot now around artificial intelligence and virtual reality in education and how we can use that to facilitate the learning experience for most of our girls.
There are, of course, drawbacks to technology. There are downsides. Kids on devices all day. The way our brains operate with a pen and paper is different. How do you teach that responsible use of technology?
Well, we're also pretty stricter about it. So even though we know that most parents give their children, mobile phones or expect them to be able to contact, we don't want to see a mobile phone during the day, and it gets taken if we do see it. A number of years ago, there was a young girl at camp who's I was watching this small group, and there's lots of heads close together and lots of talking, and then outrage, which only an adolescent female can do, outrage quite as well as these guys. And and I'm like, what is going on? And I was like, well, this kid, her boyfriend just broke up with her by text. And I'm like, okay, time out. And the kids were kind of annoyed that he'd done it. They were annoyed that it was at camp. And I just said to this kid two things. A, any boy that drops you by text doesn't deserve you. And the second thing is, we're at camp. Let's just put it all away. And they were like, absolutely. They recognized the nature of the intrusion. And so now, we run outdoor camps, or we take them off campus, and there are no phones. They're not allowed to have their phones on here at school. But they do use technology, and we are explicit around our expectations of their use. Now, the challenge that I have is that the people who are usually lecturing adolescents around the use of technology and the language that you use and how you speak to each other are usually adults. And the adults are appalling. So you cannot say to them, don't text at the table if you've got your phone right next to you. And so just understanding the role and the influence of the adult in the life of the adolescent before we point fingers about how they, and some of them do behave incredibly badly. We have a lot to learn before we start moralising at young people.
And just finally, Briony Scott, what's your go-to activity to stay sane? How do you kind of find some quiet time? Is there an activity that you like to do? Any routines or rituals?
Well, the routines and rituals I'm really bad at. So I'm not great at planning out my day, and I don't think schools are great environments for that, notwithstanding we have timetables and so forth. Just the sheer number of events that happen before school and after school make planning during the week incredibly difficult, especially I think for principals.
I've got to say I find that very refreshing, because at the moment it feels like everyone's saying, if you want to be effective in the workplace, you've got to get up at 5 and meditate and then do your mindfulness and then plan out your day and only check your emails for an hour.
I get that. It is just, I am not good at that. What I did do recently was buy a sea kayak, and a couple of weekends ago I went paddling, and there were dolphins and pelicans, and I thought, this is just magic. And then the second day I went out, I fell out twice in front of a whole group of people. I thought, this is the most embarrassing, humiliating thing I've ever done. But it is interesting around how you refuel, particularly in environments where it is there's a lot of giving, and leadership is a big part of it, is just looking out and looking after people. And the demands on people at the moment, the stresses they're under are extreme, and sometimes extreme. So sometimes they're fine, but there's a lot of people who are under a lot of pressure. And being able to be even keeled through that, I am learning a lot around what it means for me to remain even keeled, and that I too am in the same environment, but I've got to make sure that I am understanding what's happening to me and the pressures that are happening to me, which I do with various degrees of success. Sometimes good, sometimes I'm in the canoe, sometimes I'm out of the canoe. But it's that sense of
it's life,
yeah,
right?
Exactly right, and still learning. And I was talking with someone about this the other day that just goes, there is this mindset that once you hit 20, 25, you are who you are. And I just don't buy that. I think I've changed more in the last 5 years than I have, certainly when I was a teenager. That idea of just keep growing, keep changing, keep learning is within the remit for all of us, and that you're not who you are just because you're 50, for me 56. It doesn't mean that at 66 I'm going to be the same person. I want to be different and keep learning and keep growing, and I want to be wiser than I am. And so that means that I do have to recognize when I'm out of my comfort zone and where am I doing things well and where am I not. And I think now I've reached an age where I go, I have to learn more about how I manage who I am rather than relying on talent or energy or interest. I actually have to be quite deliberate about some things.
Lessons to live by. Dr. Briony Scott, thank you to you and all the teachers around Australia who've been dealing with this remote learning curveball.
Thank you. And I really do. I would love to do a shout out for the teachers. I think there's a lot of commentary in education around, different sectors, different schools, different ways of doing it. And there is, in practice, that is not the case. In practice, there is this common factor that we are honestly looking after to the best of our ability this next generation, to raise them to be wonderful young men and women in an environment where there's not a lot of role modelling. And so how you create a school environment that is a little bit countercultural to what we're seeing at the moment, that takes enormous strength, and it happens every day with those teachers in the classroom, that they're role modelling how to be good people. And I think that's just so admirable.
Dr. Briony Scott's the principal at Wenona College in Sydney. Curveball's a production of Dead Set Studios. And hey, it's completely free to subscribe. And that way you don't miss an episode, like this one.
Sitting there kind of end of year doing our analysis on how the year had gone and looking at the numbers and going, this is not working. We've actually don't have that much money left in the bank. We've probably got about 6 months runway at the rate that we're burning the cash. Yeah, what the hell are we going to do? This is not good.
Don't miss Michael Fox. That's coming up on Curveball. This show's about those curveballs you just didn't see coming. We're all just inventing it on the run at the moment, and we need to talk more about what that's like. I'd love to hear your stories. How have you coped? What's getting you through at the moment? I love a little listener gift in my inbox, so just record a short voice memo on your phone and email me the audio file. hello@deadsetstudios.com. There's also instructions on how to do this on our website, curveballshow.com. Rachel Fountain and Hannah Kinder produced this episode. Matt Liddy continues to act as an IT help desk and web whiz, and also the person picking up my kids a lot. And Bryce Halliday did the sound design. Thanks also to the team at ARN and iHeartRadio.